Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who was the Navy's lead oceanographer and meteorologist, was recently a guest on the Shawn Ryan podcast, and he brought up a UFO incident called Shag Harbour. Now, the one incident he brought up, he says claimed happened before Shag Harbour, and it's otherwise known as the Shelburne UFO Incident, right? And Tim Gallaudet says it's the very first official USO case, USO being unidentified submerged object, basically UFO underwater, right? And it's quite interesting. Now, as I dug into Shag Harbour and Shelburne, I realized they might, at one time they were considered the same, right? And now they are considered separate incidents, but it's kind of very confusing, and they could still be connected in some way. So today we're going to take a look at the clip of Tim Gallaudet talking about this incident, right, where two divers claimed to see this flying disc under the water being repaired by aliens, right, by beings outside of the craft. It's interesting, right? This is a fascinating case. It's considered Canada's Roswell, right? The Shag Harbour. But the one I'm going to talk about is before that. But we're also going to talk about Shag Harbour. That's the thing. So, again, we're going to take a look at a clip of Tim Gallaudet talking about this incident in the Shawn Ryan podcast. And then we're going to take a look at a very long video about Shag Harbour. And it's very interesting, the details that get brought up about it. Then we're also going to learn more about this book that Tim Gallaudet brings up called Sweep Clear 5, and that's the story about this Shelburne. All right, so we'll get into all of that. Let's go, y'all. If you're new to the channel and you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button. I put out a new video every day, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. I do not miss a day. And please hit that like button, veterans. That really helps out the video, so thank y'all so much for the support there. And, of course, comment down below. What do you think about the Shag Harbour UFO incident? And more importantly, the Shelburne UFO incident. And are they separate incidents? What do you think? Let's go. All right. First clip, again, Tim Gallaudet on the Shawn Ryan podcast. Link in the description. Go check it out.
Of them all the time in the ocean and, of course, in the atmosphere.
And you know of a Canadian USO encounter?
Oh, yeah, this is one of the earlier ones. It's in the 60s, I think early 60s, and there's a great book about it called Sweep Clear 5, and it refers to the name of this mine warfare exercise. The subtitle is NATO's Underwater UFO Encounter. And it's a very interesting book because it's written by a researcher who interviewed these Canadian divers. Now, what happened is, first off, is there was a major UFO event in Canada, a place called Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia, in, either late 60s, I think the late 60s. I don't remember the date. And that's all over the web. But before that, there was another encounter where UFOs were seen to go into the water. And it happened I think it coincided with a NATO exercise, and the ships all got vectored to go look for these things. And Canadian divers were interviewed and claimed to have seen these two underwater discs and actual occupants outside the craft trying to repair it. So aliens. And they even said they captured video, but they don't know where the tapes are.
Of course.
Anyways, there's this book, Sweep Clear 5, is all about it. And it's about the investigation into that. And that's the first well-documented USO case that I know about.
Wow. Was there any?
Fascinating, right? So he brings up Shag Harbour, right, which we're going to look at today, that incident. But then again, he brings up this other one that was before that, right? So these beings or occupants working on the craft, right, are from this previous incident. Because I originally made a video a few days ago with a preview of this. I think it was on Friday or Saturday, one of those days. It was last Friday's video. And people in the comments were like, he's talking about Shag Harbour, Patrick, you idiot. And it turns out he's not. So all of you who commented that were wrong, right? Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe they are the same. But he separates the two incidents, right? He's not saying the Shag Harbour incident had divers that found occupants working on the craft, right? He's not saying that's from the Shag Harbour incident. He's saying that's from a different incident before Shag Harbour. In fact, it's considered to be 7 years prior, 1960, whereas the Shag Harbour was 1967. So you'll see what I mean. This is very confusing, and by the end of this video, you might be more confused than when you started. You'll have some answers, but you'll have even more questions. Hey, welcome to Vetted, because it gets confusing. So look, what we're going to do now is real quick, take a look at this book here. Okay, Sweep Clear 5, there you can see it, NATO's UFO Encounter. Here, let's do this. NATO's UFO Encounter. Now, Chris Stiles, remember that name. All right, so it says, there was no doubt that we were dealing with off of Shelburne. There were UFOs sitting on the seabed. They were occupied and there was still activity. One was trying to help the other, which was damaged. They ordered us to the surface and ordered us to forget what we'd seen. Then the alarm sounded upon the command ship and panic broke out. So claimed 3 RCN clearance divers and 1 RCAF crash debris specialist. Clear Sweep 5 is also the story of the author's 29-year quest for the truth about the elusive Shelburne, Shelburne USO story, which hid in plain sight since 1993, masquerading as the conclusion to the famous 1967 Shag Harbour Incident. As Stiles would discover, the Shelburne case occurred a full 7 years earlier, in October 1960. That's interesting. Same month. Although we still lack some key details, we now know for certain that on October 12th, 1960, a NATO minesweeping mission declared DEFCON 1. The logbook of the mission command ship, HMCS Cape Scott, records that occurrence. 10 U.S. Navy ships and 9 RCN vessels took part in the mission. All of the participating warships have been identified and are listed. Historians claim that such a defense posture has never been evoked, not even by a commander in the field, but they are wrong. RCN clearance divers also claim that underwater film footage was shot and that some debris was collected. Where did the evidence end up? These questions and many more are grappled with between the covers of Clear Sweep 5, a unique UFO book written by the investigator that the late UFO researcher Stanton Friedman called the Bulldog. And this is Chris Stiles. All right, so again, remember that name. Interesting, right? Again, this is claiming to be before, right? I'm saying before Shag Harbour. But as I'm about to show you, it was at one point connected together, right? And you'll see what I mean from the next video we're going to watch. Now, look, in the description, you're going to find some links. One is a link to Chris Stiles talking about Sweep Clear 5 and this incident. Okay, so go check it out. It's an interview. It's great. Another one is Chris Stiles talking about the Shag Harbour on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. Go check that out. It's great, right? Now, what we're going to watch now is a video from a long while ago. All right, so this is from Eyes on Cinema. Got this from there. And it's just a very interesting video. I watched a lot of videos on Shag Harbour trying to find information about these divers, right? Because everyone said Shag Harbour, those are the diver from that. And now I see why people thought that. But they were wrong. But this is why people thought this. Because what I'm about to show you is what was considered the Shag Harbour investigation forever, for the longest time running, right? Until you find out there's separate incidents happening here. And the stories got conflated into one called the Shag Harbour, but it was actually two. Shelburne, which was 7 years earlier, and Shag Harbour, which did happen, right? But the divers and them seeing the craft, working on the craft, that happened in the Shelburne UFO incident, which there's not much information on it. That's the thing. There's not much information on that incident, the Shelburne. It's all Shag Harbour. Everything you look for Shelburne is Shag Harbour, because Shelburne is the county that Shag Harbour is in. So it gets confusing. Anyway, let's just watch this video. Sit back, relax. It's like 20-something minutes. We're going to watch the whole thing. I'm going to stop at certain points to discuss. If you want to watch it without my commentary, again, link in the description. Let's go, y'all.
172 miles away from the nearest international airport and 178 miles away from any Air Force testing range, Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia is an unlikely location for sightings of unidentified spacecraft. But UFO investigator Chris Stiles has come to this tiny outpost on the eastern edge of North America because of stories his grandfather told him about one strange October night in 1967. Stiles has uncovered an extraordinary paper trail of evidence, confirming that something anomalous, something very unconventional, crashed into the Atlantic off the coast of Shag Harbour, just as his grandfather had always described.
He told me about a 60-foot disc with 4 bright white lights that had hovered for a time in the air, tilted at a 45-degree angle, and slid down and hit the water surface with a loud noise.
Nearly 30 years after the crash.
So remember, this guy right here, Chris Stiles, is the guy that wrote the book Sweep Clear 5, right, about the Shelburne incident, right, that I showed you before, and those 2 interviews that I told you about, 2 podcast interviews that I told you about. Those are recent, right? So this is Chris Stiles, old school, right here. Again, covering the Shag Harbour incident and mentioning details about Shelburne in the Shag Harbour, right? It wasn't until later, right, that you discover it's 2 separate incidents. So I don't think many people know that, because everyone in the YouTube comments before was saying this was all Shag Harbour. They don't realize it's not. So the information you're going to hear about the divers, that's what I'm trying to point out. Hope I'm making sense here.
Stiles has discovered that there were many other eyewitnesses who still remember the crash like it was yesterday.
We thought it was a plane crash. The way it turned out was, we don't know what it was.
Laurie Wickens is a local fisherman, born and raised around Shag Harbour. He was driving at night with several friends when he spotted the strange craft.
We just come over that hill and we was driving towards Woods Harbour and we see lights. We thought it was an airplane that was coming on and going off, 4 in sequence. 1 would come on, and 2, and 3, and 4, then they'd all be out for a few seconds, then it'd start over.
Wickens and his friends saw the object crash into the harbour. They called the RCMP, who responded to the impact site.
At that time, there was a single light, maybe a half mile offshore, quite visible, but it was really dark. I was left on shore to keep an eye on the light and to watch where if anything happened to it, and briefly interview the witnesses as I was doing it. Within 5 minutes, 7 minutes, the light extinguished.
The RCMP alerted the Coast Guard, and until they arrived, local fishermen scoured Shag Harbour looking for survivors of what was thought to be a light plane crash. Captain Lawrence Smith was among the first to reach the impact site.
All I saw was some heavy yellow foam floating on the water. It was thick like shaving cream, but it was about 3 inches thick on top of the water. There was no smell. And I thought then, well, you know, if a plane crashed and it skidded across the water for a ways, that it wouldn't make a foam. But then I couldn't figure out why it would be yellow.
Early search and rescue efforts were conducted in full view of the public. Films were made. Newspapers carried the story as front-page news. Then, without warning, there was no more public disclosure. Chris Stiles believes this is because of what may have been found there.
Now remember, this show was released in the mid-90s. All right, so this is going to be roughly almost 30 years after Shag Harbour, right? And the information that I gave y'all is recent, right? It's almost 30 years after that, right? In between all this. So it's just interesting, right? But this was the story for the longest time, what you're seeing now of Shag Harbour.
I believe that this was a device, possibly a craft, possibly a probe, from another intelligent civilization, not of this earth.
Stiles has reached this conclusion after examining hundreds of documents obtained through the Canadian version of the U.S. Freedom of Information Act. Among the documents he has uncovered is this Canadian Armed Forces memo stating that the Rescue Coordination Center conducted preliminary investigation and discounted the possibilities that the sighting was produced by an aircraft, flare, or any other known objects.
There were a number of related sightings that night. In those hours before, an Air Canada flight saw UFO activity on the horizon. They were greatly disturbed. There was apparently large explosions occurring, and as the phenomena approached the aircraft, there was a lot of communication with the towers, and eventually it was decided to vacate the airspace and seek alternate routes.
Even more eyewitness accounts were found in a secret RCMP file.
Captain Leo Howard Mersey was the master of a dragger. He had 18 men aboard. All were witnesses to 4 UFOs in the distance on the water surface. They had radar returns, and after observing them for 2 hours, one of them became airborne and arced in the sky southwest toward the Shag Harbour area, which was 175 miles away.
As a public search for the craft began in Shag Harbour, behind the scenes,
many people have come, including locals, to tell a story that while this operation was going on in Shag Harbour, there was another operation up the coast about 25 miles away off of Government Point.
In 1967, Government Point was the site of a super-secret military base. Former base divers claimed the search at Shag Harbour diverted attention away from the UFO's final resting place.
A super secret. Did you hear? It's a super secret base. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Off Government Point.
While they were down there, there was still activity going on. They were reluctant to confirm details, but they knew that this thing was being repaired. As one person told me, the other object was standing nines for it, is the expression.
Let's
while
go
they were
back
down
here.
there, secret operation, people have come, including locals, to tell a story that while this operation was going on in Shag Harbour, there was another operation up the coast about 25 miles away off of Government Point.
In 1967, Government Point was the site of a super-secret military base. Former base divers claimed the search at Shag Harbour diverted attention away from the UFO's final resting place, off Government Point.
While they were down there, there was still activity going on. They were reluctant to confirm details, but they knew that this thing was being repaired. As one person told me, the other object was standing nines for it, is the expression they used, sort of overlooking and giving it protection, assistance, whatever was necessary. And they're quite certain from their experiences that this was nothing that was produced here on Earth. And some of the divers insist that they did indeed bring up some debris.
Stiles searched for documentation to support the divers' claims and found it in this letter written 2 months after the Shag Harbour incident. It specifically mentions DND, Department of National Defense, UFO material available for review. Based on this information, Chris Stiles is mounting a recovery operation to search for more UFO debris.
So think about that. Right? Remember, what we know now is that the incident with the divers that they're talking about right here in this video, right? This was produced in the mid-90s by Chris Stiles. The divers seeing the craft, the disc underwater, the beings outside, right, working on it, aliens, the other UFO protecting that UFO as they're working on it, right? The divers coming back to the surface with material found from the crash. It all comes out later that all happened with the 1960 incident, not 1967. But this document they just showed, right, is like, well, look at this document from 2 months after the October incident, right, in 1967. This helps corroborate part of that. So, right, do you see? But really, is that document for the 1960 incident? Because the diver thing happened then. I'm just saying, what other UFO cases out there are like this? Where details are all coming from a bunch of different incidents, but it's blended as one. Again, this is considered Canada's Roswell. So imagine finding out that our Roswell in New Mexico was 2 incidents 7 years apart. You know, and the stories have all been joined together. Because that's essentially what's happening here. So everyone who up to this point has thought that the divers seeing the craft underwater and them working on the aliens working on the craft, all of that, and then finding the stuff, that is not from the 1967 incident, right? According to Chris Stiles, many years later, right? And even Tim Gallaudet revealing that to be the case. And again, saying it was a NATO training mission, 1960, and that this is the first well-documented USO case ever, period, in the world, right? Let's continue this.
Sightings will document this search and bring you the findings on an upcoming edition of our program.
So basically, they don't find anything, right? That's kind of the issue here, basically. And look, we need to get back to this kind of investigation, though, right? As you'll see. Boots on the ground, getting in boats, going and checking these spots, combing the area for material of where these incidents took place, right?
Shag Harbour, at the southern tip of the Canadian province of Nova Scotia, has changed little in the last 100 years. Generation after generation here have earned their living from the sea, hauling lobster and cod out of the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And Shag Harbour would have remained an obscure northern outpost if it had not been for one strange night in 1967. There was a bright light, an enormous crash, and an unprecedented joint mobilization of Canadian and American government forces.
Exactly what hit the water in Shag Harbour, I'm not sure of. But whatever it was tracked for a great distance. It was in trouble.
This man is a member of the Canadian Armed Forces with a security clearance above top secret. He was part of the original Shag Harbour strike force and spoke exclusively with sightings about what the military knew.
It had entered the high atmosphere over in northeastern Siberia. I was told that it hit the water, crash landed, and had actually moved underwater. This thing was not only aerodynamic, but hydrodynamic also. It had the capacity to travel in 2 mediums.
Many saw it from a distance. It was a moonless night, and they weren't quite sure what it was they were seeing, but all were sure that indeed a large object had dropped out of the sky and hit the surface of the water.
UFO investigator Chris Stiles has spent several years tracking the Shag Harbour paper trail and interviewing eyewitnesses, including Lawrence Smith, the captain of the first civilian boat to arrive at the crash site. Smith remembers seeing a strange, thick foam floating above where the UFO sank.
Maybe the military is hiding something that they don't want us to know about. I don't believe that they want to talk about it. There's more than we know about or will ever know about.
Stiles' relentless pursuit of information recently turned up new proof that American interest in the Shag Harbour UFO investigation extended to the highest levels of the U.S. military.
One interesting document on Shag Harbour that's recently come to our attention is the APRO document. APRO, which is an acronym for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, says quite clearly that at the time of the Shag Harbour event, there was a U.S. air photo reconnaissance mission in the area at high altitude. An hour later, after the event, we have a strategic air command operation in the area.
According to members of the Canadian military who wish to remain anonymous, the UFO was amphibious. After crashing into the waters of Shag Harbour, the craft continued to move underwater toward a top-secret military installation off Government Point in Shelburne. It touched off a major security alert.
Near where the UFO had moved, there was a top-secret listening post for submarine detection, part of a net. And this thing almost...
This is what I'm talking about. See, Shelburne Government Point, right? They're saying there's 2 different incidents now. So you've got, again, 1967, the Shag Harbour UFO incident, as everybody knows it. And then 1960, part of this whole story is actually from 1960. And 7 years earlier, right? A different spot, close by, but 7 years earlier. The same month, though. That's interesting. That's kind of a red flag to me, I'm being honest. So I don't know. What do y'all think? Tell me in the comments.
Moved over top of their cable, submarine detection, part of a net. And this thing almost moved over top of their cable.
This object was resting on what is known as the MAD grid. That's an acronym which stands for Magnetic Anomaly Detection, part of the base's function. Certainly, one can imagine the concerns ran high during this period to find that an unknown object was literally a few miles from the location of this base, which was tasked with such an important job in North American defense.
Substantiation of the claim that the UFO did not sink in Shag Harbour can also be found in the APRO document. It states that shortly after the UFO impact, Maritime Command received a report from the Coast Guard cutter Sir William Alexander, stating that, quote, an object shaped like a torpedo was observed going along the surface, emitting flames and smoke at 44 degrees 23 minutes north latitude, 64 degrees 9 minutes west longitude. Maritime Command ordered an immediate search and recovery operation.
The Navy did have a strong expectation of finding artifacts.
The way that the UFO hit the water, it is possible something sheared off. If there were any debris found by the divers in Shag Harbour, that would have been the highest security issue on the East Coast at that time.
Officially, Maritime Command reports that Navy divers came up empty-handed. But local fisherman Donald Nickerson was there during the recovery operation and observed something being hauled out of the water.
Yeah, when we got there, they kind of acted like they didn't want us there. Seemed like it was secret. When the divers come up, there was two divers swimming with a metal, and then they passed it up aboard the boat to the guys aboard the boat. It was a piece of aluminum, or it looked like a piece of aluminum to us. It looked like it had been up some.
It is Chris Stiles' hope that the government divers didn't get everything, that there may still be UFO debris at the bottom of Shag Harbour. Working with sightings, Stiles has assembled a top-flight search and recovery team, including technicians from Canadian Seabed Research Incorporated, professional divers, and camera operators. State-of-the-art technology, including side-scan sonar, will be used to see through the murky water and paint a perfect picture of the ocean floor. On board, researchers will study the images, trying to determine potential impact patterns, as well as pieces of wreckage that may have resisted 28 years of ocean currents.
For instance, this target here has quite a high shadow behind it.
Air support.
So I'm talking about, we need to be doing this. Like Patrick's going to do this. Yeah, I'm all in on this. They don't really find anything, but they do eliminate. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go back with better technology, right? I think it's worth doing. Right, it's sort of an isolated, I mean, it's been a long time, almost 60 years.
Assists the team in pinpointing the UFO impact site, as described in the APRO document.
Roger, Survey 1, standing by.
Almost immediately, sonar readings indicate the team has a hit.
Bridge, it's the survey control. We have the target.
Chris Stiles is cautiously optimistic. The recovery team realizes that this target is more likely to be a submerged rock formation than a UFO. But the search has only just begun. Whatever crashed into Shag Harbour nearly 30 years ago was seen by many eyewitnesses who have all come forward with strikingly similar descriptions of the incident.
An unusual object described as being 60 feet in diameter with 4 bright white lights was seen to hover in the sky over the Shag Harbour area, tilt at a 45-degree angle, and then drop into the sky and hit the surface of the water. Eventually, the Coast Guard, Rescue Coordination Center, Navy, and RCAF were brought into the search effort for the object responsible.
Chris Stiles has conducted an exhaustive search for documentation regarding the historic and mysterious crash of October 4th, 1967. He has found a significant government paper trail.
The Navy did have a strong expectation of finding artifacts. In the document, it actually names a scientific consultant who was on standby to receive debris. The search conducted by the Navy concentrated in this.
Again, that same paper, it said December 1967. But the divers, I guess there's just two different diving incidents, right? So maybe the 1967 divers did find stuff, right? Even the witness is saying, I saw two divers pull up some aluminum. And the 1960 incident is where the divers saw them working on the craft, right? But as you heard at the beginning, he says that's from this incident, right? But with new information, the story changes.
Area.
In October 1995, Sightings launched its first ever salvage operation under the direction of Chris Stiles. Our goal was to locate and retrieve any pieces of UFO wreckage large enough to have resisted the forceful tides and...
Like how Chris Stiles is just a UFO investigator, but like, hang on, look at him. He's like leading this whole, like, he's got the map out in front. Like, I love it. Don't get me wrong. But he's telling everyone else, okay, this is what we're going to do. Like, what does he know about boats? Maybe he does. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It's just kind of funny. Figured the captain would be doing that. Like, it's just basically just pointing at a map and go, all right, guys, we're going to look right here where my finger is. That's where we're going to look. Let's get the boat there. I mean, what more is there? Anyway, sorry. Okay.
Operation under the directives of UFO. By all accounts, the odds were stacked against us. But this operation would offer a unique opportunity to apply scientific methods to an incident rife with rumor and conjecture. If debris could be found, our team would find it.
We hope to take the searched areas beyond the former military search and perhaps check out some of these target detections and the impact site, which was actually outside of the search already conducted by the Navy.
28 years had passed since the crash at Shag Harbour. Time was not on our side, but state-of-the-art detection equipment, unimagined in 1967, would improve our chances.
Prepare for tracking sequence at heading 1.
I wonder how much different it is now, right? It's almost another 30 years, right? And I'm sure, you know, people have gone out since. Let's be real. You know, who knows? I'm sure there's somebody out there that claims to have a piece from this. But the point is that this story got told as one for the longest time, just like this. And then later on, it turns out, oh, part of this is actually to another story. Right? Because is it that both incidents had the same stuff happen? I don't think so. Right. The thing is, it's the same month, 7 years apart. I don't know. Or is even the Shag Harbour stuff being confused with 1960? But no, because you have eyewitnesses, just the public from 1967, right? It's really this Shelburne 1960 case. It's like so interesting. It's like, what? Wait, part of that is actually from 1960, not 1967. So interesting. All right, let's continue.
59, over.
There is 500 kilohertz digital side scan sonar for seabed profiling and target detection. Aerial trajectory plotting.
Roger, survey 1, commencing sequence, over.
A towed array GEM magnetometer for underwater metal detection, and a GPS satellite tracking system to pinpoint potential targets.
This is like a History Channel show before History Channel shows, right? Come on.
Our intention was to scan and search 3 main areas of the ocean floor in the waters off Shag Harbour. These areas corresponded to eyewitness recollections and coordinates taken from a document reporting where the initial government search took place in 1967.
Sonar buoy drops out of nearby Canadian Forces Base Greenwood and the magnetic anomaly detection grid at the nearby Shelburne base, which was the coordination center for submarine detection in the Atlantic, led the authorities to believe that perhaps the largely intact object was still moving under the water.
But where it came to rest remains a mystery. Reports that wreckage was recovered from Shag Harbour on the night of the crash dictate that we begin our operation there.
Men at the base have told me that it was probably the most intense thing next to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which left the base on alert for 34 days.
The sightings investigation heads out to sea after months of onshore planning. The 3 targeted areas are scanned for potential pieces of wreckage, called targets, and each target is given a priority designation.
We were able to lay down an extensive grid pattern and pick up numerous target detections, which we gave an assessment value for high strangeness. A very simple system of 1, 2, or 3.
The initial search shows no high priority targets in Area 1, the section of ocean shore closest to the Nova Scotia mainland. Rather than send divers down to investigate lower priority targets, the team agrees to move further out and begin a grid pattern search of Area 2.
Attention bridge, this is control. We have a strong target return.
Target detection is one thing. Going down and confirming what the target is much harder indeed. We were actually getting returns off some of the very large kelp beds that produce shadows and images that were misleading. The environment presents perhaps the main challenge in doing a thorough search. Extreme current conditions are almost constant.
What was the current like down there?
The current's building up. It's going to get worse.
Conditions are deteriorating. It's my feeling that we should move on and perhaps check other targets.
But the divers press on, eliminating all of the potential targets in Area 2. The search then moves on to the deeper waters of Area 3. In Area 3, there are a number of high-priority targets worthy of investigation. The divers begin a systematic search, working into the night when a particularly promising spike hits on radar.
Control, we are approaching target area.
In the control room, the team watches the divers' progress. Individual propulsion systems and high-powered underwater lights assist the divers who are fighting increasing tidal currents and a backwash of silt from the ocean floor. As the divers close in on their bearing, they realize that the ocean currents are distorting sonar readings, giving a high-priority signal to nothing more than an unusual rock formation. The team is disappointed, but Chris Stiles is undaunted. He has eliminated 3 crash sites and can now move forward to another area where some government eyewitnesses have told him UFO debris may still be found.
I've spoken with several of the divers in the past and other support naval personnel that were involved in this, and early on they told me the story of the Shelburne connection, and it just keeps resurfacing. It's a story that won't go away.
That story when sightings continues. When the sighting search and salvage operation failed to turn up UFO wreckage or debris in 3 significant areas off the coast of Shag Harbour, Chris Stiles did not give up his investigation. He feels there is simply too much information about the mysterious UFO crash of October 4th, 1967, to abandon his search for the truth. First, there was consistent testimony from credible eyewitnesses.
We see lights moving through the sky that we thought to be an airplane at first. And there was 4 in sequence. 1 would come on, and 2, and 3, and 4.
It was reddish orange in color, and they seemed to be on about a 45-degree incline, and the lights seemed to be going in a downward motion. This thing headed down, crashed on the water, and at that time all the lights went off, and 1 other light came on a few minutes later, and that's the light that was there when I arrived on the scene.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer Ron Pond not only saw the Shag Harbour UFO, he also interviewed eyewitnesses at the scene.
There were witnesses coming from a variety of directions and in different locations, so there was no way that it was a conspiracy or any kind of an attempt to mislead anybody. It was definitely something that came down on the water.
In addition to credible eyewitnesses, Chris Stiles has uncovered a trail of documentation, leading him to conclude that the U.S. and Canadian governments knew about and monitored the Shag Harbour UFO.
The more we find, the more there is, you know. I mean, sources of even the paper trail in this have hardly dried up.
And there was this exclusive interview with a member of the Canadian military who had been debriefed as part of a Shag Harbour naval recovery operation.
I was told that it had hit the water,
This guy again.
crash landed, in trouble, and had actually moved underwater. And I think that was one of the more interesting points that I found of the whole story, because this thing was not only aerodynamic, but hydrodynamic also. It had the capacity to travel in 2 mediums.
According to this source, the UFO continued traveling underwater and finally came to rest several miles from the impact site.
Near where the UFO had moved, there was a high top-secret listening post for submarine detection.
This claim of a second location of an unidentified flying object resting on the bottom, somewhere off Government Point in the water, is very interesting, because this location was the spot where Canadian Forces Station Shelburne was located.
It is quite possible that there is something laying down there, somewhere between the crash site to the site that had moved. It's hard to move that amount of physical energy around and not leave some sort of a trace.
Because sightings' initial scientific search of Shag Harbour failed to turn up any debris, Stiles is now exploring the possibility that the crash site was 25 miles to the north, near Shelburne. It was here that a second Navy dive reportedly took place on the night of the crash.
When I spoke to the divers and support personnel early on, they told me that at the Shelburne end of the operation, where they sat over this craft for a week, that it was on the bottom and that there was still activity in it. Furthermore, there was a second craft there which was lending assistance. They believed that this was a vehicle of extraterrestrial origin. And these men had lengthy experience.
Their commanding officer would debrief them and tell them not to open their mouth. The story would not be discussed again. I can only imagine that he would assign some people to ensure that those people do keep quiet.
Although he...
Don't you see how confusing this is? Right? Again, there's supposed to be a 1967, October 1967, Shag Harbour UFO Incident, right? Story. And also a 1960 Shelburne, which, as you can see, is right next to it. Okay? The base they're talking about. From 1960 October as well. 7 years difference. But these all the same things happen. These divers saw the craft, or it did new information. They just separated the two. How do you separate those two? Like, those divers clearly who came forward and spoke, they were talking about 1967. I mean, then they changed it to 1960. Like, what happened? This doesn't make any sense, right? Am I the only one confused by this? It's an interesting story for sure. I'm just the confusion behind, especially the fantastical parts, right? The divers and what they saw with these craft, the discs, repairing, one protecting the other. They were over it for a week. There was still activity in the UFO, right? What does that even mean? Like, they had the radio on? I mean, yeah, there was activity. I don't know. But then it gets confused with this 1961, or the same things happened 7 years apart. I don't know, right? Like, that's what I'm just confused about, because that's the part that's everyone wants to know.
Has uncovered a mountain of documentation confirming civilian sightings of the Shag Harbour UFO. Stiles has found almost nothing on paper to confirm military operations in Shelburne or Government Point.
I've looked at some unique strategies and tried to be creative. For example, off Government Point, there's an area called McNutt Island, which has a manned lighthouse. I attempted to obtain the lighthouse logs, thinking that perhaps any naval operation that kept ships in the area for 7 days would show in the lightkeeper's records. These were not forthcoming. Attempts with the Coast Guard to get these seemed to indicate that these records were lost. It seems that I could get earlier records and those after, but October's were missing.
Of course, right? But what's interesting is, remember Tim Gallaudet said this is a well-documented USO case, right? Like the most well-documented USO case, right? 1960 Shelburne, right? But right here, Chris Stiles in the mid-90s is saying that, at least the show was, the narrator saying that Chris Stiles had no government documents to back up the Shelburne part of the story, right? So when did all this about NATO and all, it came from the mid-90s to now? Somewhere in between, right? That part of the story came out. So what new government documents did he get? That's clearly so well documented about it. I think what's well documented is that it's connected to a real case, being the NATO mission, right? You can find documentation on that, so you go, oh, it's a well documented case, but not really, right? It's interesting. I don't know, right? What do y'all think?
It is Stiles' belief that considerable work remains to be done in the Shag Harbour UFO investigation. Raw data needs to be analyzed further, and uncharted target sites offshore must be scanned. The elimination of 3 potential impact sites during the first sighting salvage operation is only the first step to what may be a very long road.
Shag Harbour is still a mystery. However, I feel that this case will reveal a lot about the nature of the UFO phenomena and may have some answers that even challenge our established belief systems.
Well, there you go, folks. Again, links in the description. Go watch it. Let me know what you guys think about these 2 different incidents, right? The Shelburne and the Shag Harbour being 2 separate incidents, 7 years apart to the month. Right? These divers seeing the craft, working on the craft, aliens out of this world, right? Like, I don't know, Roswell's, or Canada's Roswell, right? What is the full story there? And how does the Shelburne fit in? Is that really 2 separate incidents? Are they confused again? Why were they confused to begin with? I don't know. Curious to read all the comments. All right, guys. See you on tomorrow's video. I definitely have a very interesting video tomorrow. Have y'all ever heard of something called angel hair? Right? Sort of like spider web fluid that UFOs discharge. I'm not joking. First time I'm hearing about this. So I think I'm going to do a video on it tomorrow. We'll learn all about it. I don't know. All right, guys. We'll see you on tomorrow's video. Remember, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. Every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.